All right, so we're gonna watch this video talking about the status of young people financially, and we're gonna see if young people are financially doomed. About 30%, I actually just looked it up, about 30% of Gen Z are living paycheck to paycheck. I'm gonna be honest, I kind of thought that was higher. uh, but a lot of people don't really know what their future is gonna look like. But from my personal experience, it also depends on where you're at. So there's some places where they have pretty good paying jobs, and they have good unions and stuff like that that have good job security. And there's other places where you can't find a job that pays more than $7 an hour. So yeah, without further ado, let's watch.
Young people are facing a serious debt problem. Between 2022 and 2023, boomers saw a slight decrease in debt year over year, while Gen X saw a slight uptick. But millennials saw their average debt increase by 8%, and Gen Z
Holy
more
shit.
than 15%.
Many young adults are finding themselves sinking deeper into debt.
Just for the record, I think debt is a horrible idea. And I think if you ever have the option to not go in debt, which for most people they do, and I think a lot of people, it might feel like you don't have that option and like, I need to go take out this loan. But I think for the vast majority of people, you do not have to go in debt.
Hard concern seems to be particularly true for Gen Z.
Young people today are being shut out of the American dream.
So how much worse off are younger generation?
You don't even need credit. They don't tell you this. You don't need credit. You're better off literally putting money into savings rather than paying off a debit card or a credit card. It's insane. I think from the time I turned 18, and this isn't like against my family, but they were saying you need to build up your credit score, you need to do this, you need to do that. And I kind of just like took it as like, oh, credit is a part of life. And it was a huge part of my life. And it became kind of a problem that I had to secure on my own. And I had to figure out on my own. So the best case scenario is to just not take out debt. I'm kind of split on whether I'm talking about mortgages with that, because I do kind of think that it's a good idea to do a mortgage as long as you have a good credit score. But I think for the most part, buy a car that you can afford right now. Buy furniture and appliances that you can afford right now. And don't try to spend money that you don't have.
And how did it get so bad?
I am in debt for education.
Oh my God, I didn't know there was a word for it, doom spending. I start getting overwhelmed about, okay,
Doom
how am I gonna
spending.
pay this off?
If you ask me how I would describe my generation financially, broke. Very broke.
The minimum wage is so low and it's not livable.
I don't feel like wages have kept up with inflation at all.
Do I feel like my income has kept up with the rising cost of food and cost of living in general? Absolutely not. I now make probably just a little bit more than I did when I finished undergrad in 2017. Meaning like my income has not gone up much at all, and I have a whole master's degree now.
Meet Shahid,
He got the lock
a
in his
licensed
ear.
therapist living in Brooklyn.
The difference between
Okay, he lives in Brooklyn though. That's I don't know, if he moved to literally any other area, he would be fine as a licensed therapist.
millennials and the Gen X and the boomers, they had a lot more opportunity because their wages kind of matched up with how much things cost.
They're not wrong. Younger people today are making less than older people did at the same age. Adjusting for inflation, 22 to 24-year-olds in 2013 were making almost $52,000 a year. That number today, down to $45,000. And that difference puts Gen Z in a tough spot. In 2013, the debt-to-income ratio for the same age group was 11.76%. Today, it's more than 16%.
Technically, younger generations today are making more than any other generation did. But when you adjust for inflation which is, relative to the cost of everything else to maintain a lifestyle, it is less.
And from 2021 to 2022, for those aged 35 to 44, median income fell 0.8%.
Wait, for 35 to 44-year-olds, I'm supposed to be making 96,000. Oh, no, I'm right.
Compared to a 0.6% drop for those
I'm about
aged
here.
25 to 34. But for 15 to 24-year-olds, median income fell 5.8%. That means the youngest generation saw the most significant drop in median income when adjusted for inflation.
Emotionally, about my wages and income, I cannot tell you how much anxiety I live through on a daily basis. I don't have a safety net. I don't have anybody financially backing me. I don't have a support system. I don't have anybody to go to.
Aren't psychologists supposed to make like a lot of money? $70,000 to $190,000 per year. The median annual salary for psychologists in the United States is $92,000. Which I guess probably doesn't go very far in New York, but I feel like New York psychologists probably make more.
If I don't hold it all together, and that is anxiety inducing.
The gap between wages and cost of living has pushed many younger people to increasingly turn to credit cards to pay for goods and services. Last year, the average credit card balance for early 20-somethings was 26% higher than the balance millennials carried at the same age in 2013. Not only is Gen Z racking up credit card debt faster than any other generation.
Yeah, and it's a trap. So what people do is like, you get a job, and just for reference sake, say this job has $40,000 like that you make like annually, and you end up, and I understand that this is not realistic, but you end up with like $30,000 worth of like bills and stuff like that. And you think, oh, this new car that I have, I could spend that extra $10,000 that I make to like make the payments on this car, or this new thing that I want. I could use it to make payments, right? And what people will do is the more money they make, the more credit they'll take out. And this is not everybody. Not everybody does this, but a lot of people do. So like all of a sudden this person is making $100,000 a year, but they have $60,000 worth of debt. So like it evens out, so they're still living in poverty.
But 1 in 7 Gen Z credit card users are reportedly maxed out.
In this period of high inflation, people are just trying to maintain the lifestyles that they've always had, and it just costs more.
Yeah.
These low wages are also compounded with another big challenge for younger generations: rising housing costs.
That's also horrible.
What I'm more worried about after graduation is affording a house.
I think the housing crisis is probably one of the biggest problems in America right now. I think my dad bought a house for $120,000 10 years ago or 12 years ago, and he sold it recently for $450,000. So yeah, it's pretty crazy.
It's kind of scary.
There's no way I could own a home. That's like a far-fetched dream. The cost of like homes has just changed dramatically. It's like really hard to even rent.
The older generations just do not have a realistic view of exactly what we're dealing with. They grew up in a time period where you could go to work, you could like work a 9 to 5 and only that 9 to 5, and over time you'll be able to save up enough to buy a home. That's not the standard anymore.
The landscape for housing, both renting and buying, looks very different.
I think it depends on where you live
today. Thanks to soaring prices,
especially as a psychologist, like what? That is not a minimum wage job.
And high interest rates. Older generations, including baby boomers and Gen Xers, still make up the majority share of home buyers.
The barrier to entry to buy a home is much higher. You have to have a bigger down payment because the median value of a home is over $400,000, right? At the same time, borrowing costs are higher. They're at 7%. And so taken all together, you just need to save a lot more and a lot longer to be able to buy, a starter home.
For renters, it's also troubling. Rents nationwide climbed 30% from 2019 to 2020.
The median varies differently by like where you live. So like if you want to stay in a big city like New York or LA or you're going to be paying a lot of money for a house. Now I'm not saying like everywhere else like houses have gone up by like quite a bit, but like let me see. Texas houses for sale. Zillow. Okay, it's a 4-bed, 3-bath in El Paso for $240,000. Like, it's not cheap, right? But it's not. Well, I guess I'm probably wrong. But you can definitely find houses that aren't $400,000. So, like this one, $160,000, 5 bedrooms. This one probably needs a little bit of work, but not everybody needs a McMansion. Like, I wouldn't even want to live in a house like this. Ugh. Can you imagine how hard that would be to keep clean?
While wages across the country were only up 20%.
Housing costs are just taking up that much more of their paycheck.
The rent goes up every year. The wages do not. Depending on the month, it can be upwards of like 50% of my income.
Between housing being so expensive and income not keeping up with inflation,
New
the
York
debt
is
crisis
insane.
for younger generations has only intensified.
I pay about $1,200 a month for the 2-bedroom apartment that I live in, which isn't that significant of a portion of my income because I don't live in a huge city.
But for many, including Shaheem, there's another much larger obstacle looming over them.
If I had to say which debt scares me the most, it is hands down my student loans.
My tuition is around $90,000 a year.
Holy shit.
You meet someone from another country and they're like, it's what? Like, that's a lot of money.
I don't know the balance. Last time I checked, it was upwards of 150, $60,000.
One of the biggest debt.
That's why he's poor. I understand getting student debt if you're going to be a lawyer, a doctor, a pilot. I'm trying to think. Any other specialties that make over like $150,000 a year. But pretty much anything outside of that. Because like, if you do the math for it, a lot of people can pay through law school, and with the money that they make like pretty much right out of law school, they'll be able to pay it off. So I don't think it's necessarily always a bad idea, but I think for the most part, most people should not get student debt. And I think a lot of people also get student debt to party.
Burdens that they'll take on one of the first debts most Americans take on.
More than ever before, the very thing young adults are told to do to secure their future is one of the biggest reasons that the future is increasingly in doubt.
We're seeing college enrollment levels drop, or we're seeing that some students are trying to be smarter about how they're going to college. Some are living at home, some are foregoing college altogether.
Let's look at the average cost of public universities since 19...
I think if you have the ability to live at home while you're in college, I think you should absolutely do so. Now, I have seen colleges that like require people to live in the dorms for like a year, which is pretty dumb. But I think if you're going to college for like 99% of people, you should go to an in-state college that's near your home, and you should just live there or do it online.
1970, when a year's tuition cost around $1,300. In 2020, public university tuition was over $21,000 yearly. Of course, that's 50 years worth of inflation, but when we adjust...
Did this change? Or is this factoring in... These numbers are misleading. So, like... This... I think most public four-year universities, what they do when they advertise their tuition is they advertise their tuition plus room and board in the same package, right? So it might say this number, but that's only if you live in the dorms, and that doesn't include any sort of like federal student aid or anything like that. So like the Pell Grant with like FAFSA.
Just for said inflation, the cost to attend public university in 1970 was only around $10,000, less than half of today's cost. When we look at the cost of private universities adjusted for inflation, it's a huge jump too.
I still think this is pretty bad.
To more than $52,000 compared to less than $21,000 in 1970.
Those really high student debt level burdens are not common in other countries. We are seeing a mass kind of disillusionment with higher education. You know, I think getting a four-year college degree used to be so intertwined with the American dream, and some young people are rejecting that.
In one poll,
you also have a lot of problems with, like a student they'll just jump into, and I think this is a huge problem with America, but people will jump into college without any thought, right? Because they think that that's what you have to do to be successful. And it's not their fault, right? By any means, it's not their fault. It's everybody around them. They talk about the college, like, you need to go to college and get a good job. You need to do this. You need to get a good job, et cetera, et cetera. And so they jump in and they're like, okay, I'm just going to knock out my... and I think my dad told me to do this when I was 18, and I didn't. I didn't do it. But and his heart was in the right place, so it's not his fault. But I'm gonna jump into college. I'm gonna get my generals knocked out, and then I'm gonna figure out the rest later. Which is fine if you figure it out, right? But when you go to college, you have to choose a major, right? And people get halfway through their major path and they change it, which makes them stay in college for 5 years or 6 years. So you're talking about a 4-year degree. That's only a 4-year degree if you have a plan, right? So there's a lot of nuances with it. But I think the only reason I would say you should ever go into college is if you know exactly what you're going to do. Now, community colleges can also be pretty cheap if you do want to like knock out generals and stuff just to get a little bit of higher education. That's usually a good idea.
more than half of those who borrowed for education say that student loan debt has caused them to put off making important financial decisions.
I grew up in abject poverty. I went to school, I graduated, I did all of the things that they said that I should do, and I am still stuck in the same spot.
This massive burden, combined with others for their generation, paints a bleak picture for the debt crisis. But there's a fourth, lesser known reason that feeds off of this bleak outlook. It's called doom spending.
Doom spending.
Doom spending to cope with the stress.
Home ownership or starting a family is so out of reach.
I think that people want to treat themselves to small luxuries
that'll bring us a semblance of the kind of adulthood we were promised.
Doom spending. I love it.
It kind of makes us, feel a little bit happier about the situation. So if it's going to be like this regardless, I might as well get something for myself that I like and enjoy.
For me, it's like shopping, clothing,
travel.
It does alleviate some of the stress.
Doom spending is like retail therapy with a fatalist twist. A lot of people feel hopeless or pessimistic about their financial futures, and that's manifesting in a lot of different ways. Some people turn to doom spending
And this consumer habit is backed by research.
So in one of my research papers, I looked to ask the question, why do people not save enough for retirement ages?
That's Stephen Wu, an economics professor at Hamilton College.
And there have been many explanations for why people do not save. Sometimes people lack the information about how to save. Some people might lack self-control to do so. They may know that they should save, but that they're unable to do so. And I introduce another phenomenon, this idea that perhaps...
Before he says this, I think impulse spending is a huge problem right now. Because it was never... so you look at all the differences with like inflation and stuff, and those are there. They're huge, right? So like the average person today makes a lot less than the average person in 1950. But the average person in 1950 didn't have a option to sorry, I just got a message. The average person in 1950 didn't have the option to like go down to the store and pull out a credit card and swipe it real quick. Like they had to carry cash, and they had to get that cash from somewhere. They had to store that cash from somewhere. So like they had to plan out what they were going to do like well in advance, so they didn't pull out too much, right? And I think that actually had a big impact on not impulse spending, because you had to think about things that you buy a little bit more.
People are fatalistic. They think that whatever they do doesn't necessarily affect their future outcomes.
Professor Wu's study found that those who doom spend or have fatalistic tendencies believe they have little or no control over their future.
So that may lead to individuals to just
Yeah.
throw their hands up and say,
My life sucks anyways, so I might as well just go spend this.
well, why worry about saving now? Because even if I do save, I may still have financial difficulties in the future.
That also goes with, I guess it goes hand in hand with impulse buying, because, hey, Crimo, is that how you pronounce your name? Crimodas? But yeah, it's I think it's a pretty big problem.
Instead of saving, many are splurging on luxury goods to soothe their economic despair. And while 27% of Americans of all ages admit to doom spending, the rates are even higher among Gen Z and Millennials, at 35 and 43% respectively.
Well, I believe that people do it because they need a dopamine hit.
Younger generations are also growing up in an online environment of hyperconsumption.
People want this kind of TikTok, Instagram-worthy lifestyle. Never before have young people been so exposed to this aspirational lifestyle.
Partner with L'Oreal Paris to show you guys
where people kind of have these expectations of success and what they want their lives to look like. And those things cost more.
And the rise of buy now, pay later products has driven Gen Z into more debt.
Today, younger people have Venmo, they have PayPal, they have
Yeah,
buy now, pay
convenience is
later,
like
they
a really
have
bad
earned
thing.
wage access, they have cash advance.
And I think some people can have the self-control to not conveniently spend all their money, but I think for the most part, they will.
Apps on their phone. It's so easy to lose track of how much you're spending.
So what does the future of this
At least to an
ballooning
extent.
debt crisis hold for young adults? Many are looking to the government for help. But young people would need sweeping policy change to truly lessen the burden of debt.
The emotional toll on younger people facing this debt crisis is immeasurable.
There is a lot of uncertainty, and I think perhaps we may see people saving less. When those generations get older, they may be less prepared for retirement ages.
Younger generations face some of the most difficult economic headwinds of their time that are forcing them to take on more debt to achieve the same lifestyle that generations before had.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, that's the video. I think that a lot of these kind of videos don't really take into account a lot of the problems that young people have, and a lot of the I guess flashing noises that are actually like in front of young people's face and the reason that people go to college and some of the other things that I've talked about. But I'm not trying to say that to negate the points that were made in the video, right? Student debt is definitely a problem. But it's not the only problem, right? And I think for the vast majority of people, like that girl didn't even say what she did. She was like, I'm $90,000 in student debt. I've talked with a lot of people who made it through college with less than 12 or like, what is it? Less than like $20,000.